Africa's dream to connect all its major cities with an integrated high-speed railway network has taken a critical step forward. Last week, a 5-year action plan was signed between the African Union Commission and China. The integrated high-speed train network is a flagship project of Africa's Continental Agenda 2063. And this 5-year plan is a result of numerous planning sessions between the African Union Commission and China to promote cooperation in transport networks and industrialization fields. So what are the key milestones and implementation timelines of the project? And what economic, social and political outcomes will be produced by Africa's high-speed rail network? I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. Now, the creation of an integrated high-speed train network that connects all African capitals is high up on the African Union's Agenda 2063 and would not only facilitate better movement of goods, people and services, but also enhance new transport and commerce arteries into Africa. And just last week, part of this goal was realized when a new 752-kilometer line linking the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa with the port of Djibouti was officially opened. It is the first modern electrified railway across the African continent. And CCTV's Girum Chala has more.
This new rail line is expected to play a significant role in transforming Ethiopia's industrial sector by enhancing the country's imports and exports and cutting travel time for freight and passenger transport. The new railway line will provide Ethiopia with fresh impetus in its push towards becoming a middle-income country.
Both international investors as well as domestic investors, there's a very substantial reduction in the cost, the transportation cost, the logistics cost that they used to incur from a cost perspective, but also from an efficiency perspective. In other words, you can now get your goods to the market much quicker. So whoever is placing orders, for example, you're sitting in Europe, textiles, garments, leather, whatever it is that they're buying from Ethiopia, they now can manage their supply chain much more efficiently and much more reliably because they know this train will be there in 10 hours, whereas the the trip that used to take by truck 4 days, 5 days, 7 days, 10 days.
This $3.4 billion railway line was built by China Railway Engineering Group. Exim Bank of China bankrolled up to 70% of the construction costs, with the Ethiopian government settling the difference. The project has also served to transfer the much-needed technology and skills to Ethiopia's railway transport sector.
The main duty of the Ethiopian Railways Corporation, right from its inception, was building a capacity for the nation in the railway industry. In this regard, more than 50 young citizens were trained in Russia, China and England for a Master of Science in Railways Engineering. These are the new leaders of the train industry, together with thousands of other Ethiopians working in operating our trains.
The Ethio-Djibouti standard gauge railway is the first of its kind on the continent, covering a distance of 656 kilometers and powered by electricity. This modern rail is also part of the regional railway transport integration project connecting Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda and South Sudan.
Regional integration is critical because inter-Africa trade is only about 11–12% of overall trade, only 12%. So in other words, Africa is actually trading outside of the continent. So this actually helps contribute to this agenda that Africa has of increasing regional trade and integration. So if you look at it today, it's Ethiopia, Djibouti. Next time, Lapset from the Kenya port via South Sudan, Ethiopia. This all can be connected to enhance the competitiveness.
Ethiopia has ambitions of becoming Africa's manufacturing hub. That goal is already beginning to take shape, with many factories relocating from China. Also setting up shop in Ethiopia are investors from Turkey and India. But many experts will tell you it is the new Ethiopia-Djibouti railway that is likely to significantly bring Ethiopia closer to its industrialization dream. Grumtara CCTV, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, the signing of a 5-year action plan between the African Union Commission and the government of the People's Republic of China is a critical step towards realizing Agenda 2063 and follows the Memorandum of Understanding signed between the two sides in January of 2015 to promote cooperation in railway, road, regional aviation networks and industrialization fields. A number of milestones are expected to be realized in the next 5 years, and CCTV spoke to MUKTAR Yedaly, Director of Infrastructure and Energy at the African Union Commission, to find out what these are.
Thank you very much. Africa's dream to connect all its capitals and major cities with an integrated high-speed rail networks has taken another critical step following the signing of a 5-year action plan between the African Union Commission and China. Now, what does this 5-year action plan entail?
The EU vision is about integration. These projects contribute tremendously to the setup of that vision we have, which is actually to have every capital city in Africa connected through by railways. That is what we call our century dream. And we hope we will implement it soon and to make sure that our continent is integrated properly.
At the same time, this 5-year action plan is the result of numerous planning sessions, as you remember, an exchange of visits between the African Union Commission and China since the signing in January 2015 of the Memorandum of Understanding between the two sides. So what are some of the key project highlights of this 5-year action plan?
Well, as I said, this is the action plan is setting up the cooperation between the two parties, China and Africa in general. I just want to highlight the 3 major principles based on which we have actually set up this cooperation. Number 1 is this cooperation should be based on the mutual benefit. Both parties have to see benefit from this cooperation. It's not one way, it's 2 ways cooperation. Number 2, it should be based on promoting local entrepreneurship and local manufacturing, and everything that is actually needed for this project and the setup should be coming from the continent. We would not like to have anything coming imported and exported within the continent. Number 3, capacity building and technology transfer. Those are the major 3 principles that actually are driving this 5-year action plan.
This integrated high-speed train network is a flagship project of Africa's Continental Agenda 2063, the 50 years plan of the continent. Now, break it down for us, the implementation phase and timelines.
That's a very good question, and this is what actually we are still working on. At this point of time, we have set up the framework for the entire project itself, the elements, the component of the project, and soon, as part of the handover we are taking, the timeline will be set up soon, and hopefully before the end of the year. The 10 years action plan is setting actually the implementation of the entire flagship project of the African Union. This considers the monitoring, the setup of the governance, the funding, the coordination mechanism with the member state and different stakeholders. All those elements actually are embedded in the 10-year action plan, and certainly this project will be part of that 10 years action plan.
A project of this nature, understandably, is quite complex and has immense cost implications. So what is the overall cost of this project and how is it going to be funded?
Again, at this point of time, we are preparing the term of references for the feasibility study itself. The project implementation unit will be set up soon. We are already discussing those matters from both parties, China and from the African Union side. And that feasibility study will exactly define the entire cost. And remind you, with the new technology and with the new development in the way the railways are setting up, the cost will be certainly affordable for everybody. I will not anticipate on what's going to happen in the future. However, I am sure we will be making the funding mechanism in a very inclusive manner for all stakeholders that are involved in, meaning the member state, the regional economic communities, our partners will be certainly involved. But again, it is still at the feasibility study stage.
Final question to you. How does the integrated high-speed train network tie in with Africa's aspirations of forming a continental free trade area and generally also motivate economic development?
As I was saying at the beginning, not only this is implementing the EU vision in terms of integration, but also that means that it is all those framework that has been already accepted within the African Union Commission, be it the CTFA or the boosting the intra-African trades or CADIP even, and the PIDA implementation. This train will be, this high-speed train project will be one of the major driving factor for the implementation of those frameworks and vision of the African Union in terms of integration, trade, movement of people, and so on.
We're going to take a short break on the program, but when we come back, my expert guests will help unpack the potential for high-speed rail networks in Africa. To stay with us.
It is to make our country transform and truly make us a middle-income country. Let us not put obstacles that help or that delay our progress to that particular agenda.
That was Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta speaking of the potential of the Kenyan standard gauge railway, expected to be operational by early next year. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Now, to help unpack the potential for high-speed rail networks in Africa, I have expert guests standing by in Beijing. Liu Shichin, he's a senior researcher at Renmin University. In Lagos, Johnston Chukwu, he's the director at COWRIE Asset Management Limited. And in Johannesburg, Rudolph du Plessis, he's a researcher for the Economic Diplomacy Program at the South African Institute of International Affairs. You all, thank you for joining in this discussion. Rudolph, I'll start off with you though. Africa's dream to connect all the capitals on the continent from Cape to Cairo, that is becoming a possibility. It is taking shape. First, let me get your thoughts and views on the possibility of an interconnected Africa.
The prospects of it are absolutely amazing. I mean, the project that President Kenyatta is referring to is indeed the biggest investment in Kenya's post-colonial history at $7.6 billion. Now, China's definitely stepped up in a way that many traditional Western financiers haven't. And it's invested in Ethiopia and Djibouti. We've seen the recent completion of the railway there. We've heard news of a massive investment made in Tanzania. There are agreements with South Sudan, with South Africa. It's truly an interesting prospect.
Johnson, let me just get your views here on that interconnectivity for West African region. Of course, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, if you look at the West African market, for instance, you realize that one of the greatest challenges we have in West Africa is because we do not have infrastructure that connects the different countries in West Africa. There is actually supposed to be a trans-Sahara highway that is supposed to run from Central Africa to West Africa. That has been in the pipeline for quite some time, and because of that, we now have a fragmented market in West Africa. It takes a lot of times. It takes goods to move from one West African country to Europe and back to West Africa for you to transport goods through the seaport, because you do not really have a lot of sea-going vessels that actually move between the West African countries. So it's critical that we build infrastructure in West Africa. We have had a lot on the pipeline for quite some time, but the level of construction is very slow, unlike what we have that just happened in the case of moving from Ethiopia to Djibouti, or what the Kenyans are doing, the standard highway, rail line that is running from Mombasa to Nairobi. Right. The West Africans have been behind in terms of constructing the highways that we need to connect the countries in West Africa.
Mr. Liu Shichin, let me get your perspective here. I mean, this has been described as a very grand project. China building railways, high-speed railways and roads from Cape to Cairo. What is behind China's initiative?
I think this initiative shows that China's concept to help the African people to get the the same prosperity as the Chinese development in the past 30 years. Because as everybody knows that China has so good relations with the African countries, especially also with many African countries, also very especially with Egypt. So this is a very close connections between these African countries.
Rudolph, we just heard the extent of interconnectivity or lack of in West Africa. Let's hear the state of interconnectivity in the Southern African region. Where are we at the moment?
In terms of Southern Africa, Southern Africa is actually quite integrated due to colonial infrastructure and a lot of the South African initiatives. However, a lot of the lines are quite dilapidated and in quite a bad state. Further compounding it is that the Southern African railway network doesn't actually connect with the East African railway network. So it's in this regard that we need some very serious investment in terms of interlinking these different economic communities. In South Africa, it's quite possible to take a train from, for example, Johannesburg to Cape Town, but it takes quite a while, and definitely in terms of high-speed railway, it would vastly improve interconnectivity and also internal trade within the region.
Right. Mr. Liu, though, a lot of questions are going to be asked about the quality and reliability of the Chinese projects in Africa, particularly because building roads and railways and ports across Africa is going to be, it is a massive venture by the Chinese. What is the state of Chinese quality and reliability of those projects?
As we know that China has a rich experience in the building and the construction, the road and also railway in the past years, especially also in African countries. As I remember, 45 years ago, we began to build the first railway in Tanzania because my colleague at that time also involved in the project. I was working in the Ministry of Rail Industry in China. So at that time, I know that China touched a very significant importance for the quality control, and we have a very high level of engineering companies, and we have a very profound management system. So in this way, we put the quality and also management in the first line, that we should not only to build up a railway, but we also have to build up the first class and the first quality of railway to help the African countries there. This is a testimony for China's economy and the technology, because we have to install all these equipments and to train the people, local people there, and to operate these railways by themselves years before or years after. So in this way, the China's technology, China's standard also showed very successful in the years to come.
Right. Johnson, is that an issue though in the Western African region, because the Kaduna-Abuja rail in Nigeria has recently been completed?
Well, yes. What the Chinese have done so far in West Africa, a couple of those projects are, you could actually say, met world-class standards. Take, for instance, the one you just mentioned, the Kaduna-Abuja standard gauge rail, which is the only standard effective or operational standard gauge rail in Nigeria, or in fact in West Africa, was also built by the Chinese, and it's operational as we speak now. And so far, there has not been any complaint about quality. Of course, it's a very new project. There has not been any complaint about quality with respect to that project. There are a couple of other projects that the Chinese are supposed to handle. There's a standard gauge rail that's supposed to run from Lagos to Kano. That's about 1,300 kilometers of standard gauge rail that also is supposed to be handled by the Chinese, but I don't think any substantial work has started on that. And the government is also planning another corridor, rail corridor that was supposed to run from Lagos to Calabar. I think the Chinese are also being considered for that project. That's obviously drawing from the fact that the Kaduna-Abuja high standard gauge rail was well done. But that notwithstanding, there has always been concerns about quality when it comes to some of the projects that the Chinese have done in West Africa. But I think the key thing is that there has to be defined standard ab initio at the point of awarding of this contract, and those standards need to be monitored, measured, and enforced. I think once those systems are put in place, we should be able to have projects executed in West Africa that meet world-class standard though they are handled by the Chinese.
Right. Rudolph Plessis, of course, there are going to be issues that will need to be addressed within the next few years, though, if this major project from Cape to Cairo is to become a reality. What are some of the issues we need to focus on, or the continent should focus on, to make that a feasibility?
Well, one major issue is obviously the issue of land. So I think the ball would very much lie in the court of African countries to ensure that these projects and their feasibility has been tested before implementing them. And then secondly, I think one of the main reasons that colonial railways eventually grew as dilapidated as they did is due to the fact that adequate maintenance wasn't carried out. Now, I think that can be tackled in two ways. The first way would be obviously capacity building initiatives to ensure that there's enough adequate training on the African side, and that there's enough institutions to ensure that these railways are adequately maintained by the right people that can do the job. And then secondly, I think it's also important that the feasibility of these railway lines need to be tested very, very thoroughly, because if these lines are not profitable enough and do not see enough traffic due to maybe market share lost to trucks, for example, there might be the possibility that they might not be affordable, and there might not be the funds to maintain. So it's very important to make sure that there's also incentives for people to use these lines, especially in terms of cargo. But I think it's an exciting prospect, and it can definitely sort of assist Africa in terms of creating scale economies. It will bring in investment. It will bring in investment in the manufacturing sector, and it will also ensure that intra-African trade be improved, which is vital to the development of Africa.
Right. Johnson Chukwu, obviously in your segment as well, there are issues that you would be hoping that Africa or Chinese can put in place to address the various issues. What do you think those should be?
Well, I think one of the things that should be built into the project is that there must be an extended period of post-project management by the construction companies, such that the projects are managed and supervised by the construction companies for a longer period of time. So if there are failures within that period of time, they should be fixed. And then there should also be the issue of knowledge transfer and skills transfer that should be integrated as part of the project, the contracts, such that local skills are developed to subsequently manage those projects. Just like my colleague just said, a lot of the failures we have in the narrow gauge rails were because the process of knowledge transfer was not effective by the time the Europeans were leaving. And Nigerians or Africans who inherited those rail lines did not have the competencies to manage them. Now that we're talking of next phase of infrastructure development, and the Chinese are basically leading the drive, we should make sure that, one, that there's a knowledge transfer and skills transfer, and two, there's an extended post-project supervision and oversight, so that failures are immediately handled by the project contractors.
Mr. Liu, obviously this is a question for China, though, because there are issues of sustainability post-project and also questions of knowledge and skills transfer. Is this already being built from China, though? Is this already being built into the African projects, into the African perspective?
Yes, actually. So we have already built such system in China also for to import or export to African project. As we know that the railway construction, sometimes we say that the construction is more easier, but the most challenge is after the construction, that maintenance is more important to keep the railway in good conditions. As we know that in African countries, you have different weather conditions and geological problems, also human being problems and training problems. So I think the maintenance will become more acute and more focused in the future. So we hope that also China build up a complete engineering project and a system to help the African companies and help African partners to keep good maintenance and perfect professional maintenance to keep the railway in good conditions. I think that maintenance is even more important for the African countries, especially when we are talking about the localization of the project. We have to be aware and pay attention that how to train the local people to be more professional and more effective in maintenance.
Rudolph du Plessis, of course, we are talking about Africa as one entity, but of course Africa is 54 countries at various levels of development here. There are bound to be challenges in achieving this Cape to Cairo initiative.
True, there are definitely challenges. Challenges in terms of governments being able to speak to each other. There are challenges of geographies. There are challenges of skills available in different countries. But I think in this there are opportunities. Scale economies can definitely assist in developing African infrastructure in terms of also developing African manufacturing capabilities. So where skills transfer is essential in places that are less developed, it is also essential to make sure that African skills, where they exist, are implemented in these places, so that skills transfer not only happen between Chinese to African personnel, but also from African to African personnel. I think that's also important.
Right. Mr. Liu, Shijingdo, what are we likely to see in the short term in terms of preparations for this massive project? What are we going to see in the short term, and what will we see in the long term?
I think in the long term, in African countries, we have to pay attention to the 2 points. First point is all the countries related are trying to build up the new ways that should keep the political stabilization. I think political stabilization is the precondition for the economic development in all countries, including also in European or in Asian countries. In African countries, is most important thing. I think that because they have some sensitive groups there, they are trying to make troubles to have to influence this such a construction there. The second is the financial problem that most of the African countries are short of financial resources. But I think African states and nations, you have another very strong point that you have very rich resources. I think in this way, to compensate the shortage of financial resources, I think this could be possible. So in the future, the third point is also another for the talented people training to build up a professional and effective and more reliable people that can know the engineering project, that have more advanced technologies and more management system. So all these 3 points could be realized and help to develop the African economy. I think this is the most important thing for the African countries to emphasize their endeavors to go further in the right direction.
Right, that's all we have time for on this week's Talk Africa, but thank you to my guests for their insights. In Beijing, Liu Chichin, he's a senior researcher at the Renmin University. In Lagos, Johnson Chukwu, he's a director at COWRIE Asset Management Limited. And in Johannesburg, Rudolph du Plessis, he's a junior researcher for the Economic Diplomacy Program at the South African Institute of International Affairs. Remember, you can join the conversation at home through Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. And do join us again next week for more on Talk Africa. Goodbye.